because he's got to follow us around. It's one of his many talents that I give.
This one? It's not.
Usually it's Madison, but Madison hasn't been here for classes. But anyway, let's pray and we're going to start. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Amen. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, everywhere, fills all things, treasure your blessings, giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity, save our souls of the one. Through the prayers of the Holy Fathers of Jesus Christ, our God, and mercy and save us. Amen. So welcome to Class 2 of 2023. And today is the fun class because today is the class where we get to see why the church is set up the way it's set up. So I have 2 handouts for you. So take one and pass it on. You can, yes, just pass it on. And it's going to help us understand kind of the theology. If you remember in the class, last class, I had talked about how all the different things that influence the way the church says it's the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And part of that is architecture. Part of it is why the church is set up the way it is. And it's set up the way it is. How you doing? Good to see you. Just in time, we just started. And part of it is there's a theology going on. And the theology is expressed. Okay, thank you. Everyone, where's the other one?
Here.
Ah. And the theology is found, it pervades everything that we do. It pervades everything we do. Now remember that word theology, theologos, words about God. And ultimately, one of the great church fathers said, a theologian is someone who prays. So how we pray, how we worship, how we conduct the worship service is essential for us understanding what we believe. There's a famous phrase from St. Irenaeus of Lyon, not St. Irenaeus, it's another one, Vincent of Lorraine. And he said, lex orende, lex credende. What we pray is what we believe. He uses another part of the Theology of that, which is, and what we do. And so, when we go through the church today, we're gonna discover this, and it will also help kind of acclimatize you to space and worship that you've been observing but may not quite understand. So that's on the one hand. The second thing I want to tell you about is the famous story. How apocryphal it is, I don't know, but it is certainly the famous story. And it's the story of the baptism of Rus, when Russia became Orthodox. And it started with St. Vladimir. His icon is somewhere here. And St. Vladimir was the Prince of Kiev, and his mother was already Orthodox. She was a Christian. And he was a pagan. And not the best of pagans, shall we say. But he sent out emissaries, and he wanted to see all the different religions. And so he sent people to understand Judaism, to understand Islam, to understand Rome, to Roman Catholicism, and he sent someone to Constantinople, to Hagia Sophia, the great whole church in Constantinople. And if you've ever been there, you'll understand this. And he came back, and they all gave their reports. And the emissary said, they gave reports, but he said, when we were in Hagia Sophia, we didn't know whether we were in heaven or in earth. And truly, God must be with these people. And that's an important point. Whether the story is true or not is not the point here. The point is this idea of heaven and earth coming together. And the Orthodox worship believes strongly in that, and it's reflected in its buildings, in the way it's set up. It's a place where heaven and earth come together. And that we are lifted from here up to heaven, but yet heaven is coming down. Just look right above us here, right? This idea that Theotokos, Mary, is the image of the church, right? Church is the place where God dwells, and God literally dwelt in her. And she's sitting there with her arms outstretched, and she's giving that image of gathering people together. And Christ is in the middle there, and he's giving the blessing. Now, normally in many churches, that icon is actually Christ. It's called Pantocrator. In this case, it's the Theotokos, but that image of the church, that image of what we call Emmanuel, God is with us. That God is coming down from heaven to us, and we are being lifted up towards God. Which is why in Orthodox architecture you don't see spires, you see domes. Because the dome is the idea of God coming down and gathering us together. So some of the domes are massive. Hagia Sophia is one of the largest domes ever built, still is. And it's sometimes the whole church is like the size of the dome. But it's that idea of it embracing and bringing us together. So I want you to keep that in your mind, that we're always looking at how are we connecting heaven to earth. Even our worship service should be doing that. Right? During the cherubic hymn, before I bring the gifts out in procession, we sing what? Lay aside all earthly cares. Let us mystically represent the cherubim. We'll sing the thrice, and now put aside all earthly cares. And that's the idea. We're putting aside all this stuff. It's going to still be there. But now we're being brought together into a different way of thinking. Some of the church fathers even argued that time stops when you're in church. Now, we know it doesn't. It's still, you're going to leave church at a certain time. But yet, there's a way of thinking about that time does not exist because we're being lifted out of chronos into kairos. And we're going to learn what that means in a bit. Now, any questions on that? Great. So, another thing was the historical development. And so, and this is fascinating. If you go to Yale, to the Peabody Museum, you'll find items there from a archaeological dig, where they actually had dug up a synagogue and a Christian church from about the same period. And they were very identical. They even had iconography. Now, the church itself, the idea of the church, developed in two ways. The first thing is this idea of the temple in Jerusalem. Right? That is the kind of the prototype of what happens. Now, remember what the temple in Jerusalem was. That was the place where the ark rested. That's, the Ark of the Covenant, Indiana Jones and all that. And that was the place. And in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, there were certain items that were placed there. And that's why if you look on that one colorful picture, you'll see, there's lots of mock-ups because no one's seen it. It's never, it's been destroyed. But so this is just one mock-up. And there are a couple of things that are important in the Holy of Holies. It's where the Ark of the Covenant was. It's where the candlesticks were, the 7-branch candlestick. There was the mercy bread that was fed to offering, but it was also manna from heaven that Moses had in the desert. There was a rod of Aaron, which had budded forth life. There was the images of the angels, and it had a curtain across it. And the high priest would go into there once a year, and they would tie a rope on him. We're going to hear about this on Sunday, actually, in one of the readings. And if he wasn't worthy, he dropped dead. And they couldn't get him out, so they had the ropes so they could pull his body out, right? And so that only the high priest can go in once a year and serve the sacrifice. There was the incense, where the incense burned. There was the candles, and all that stuff that we see now that we have. But instead of the priest going in there once a year, as we hear in the readings, Christ, the high priest, went in there, accomplished the final sacrifice himself, and now it's open for the priest to serve Orthodox churches, there will be a curtain between the royal doors, and they'll be open and closed at certain times. In the Coptic church, they actually have a curtain that goes over the entire iconostas, and at certain times they'll actually reveal it. So the worship that we have is very much based on temple worship. There was an interesting woman, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, she wrote a book, she was Methodist, and she gave a talk at seminary, and she wrote a book about temple worship, and then she looked at Orthodox worship, and she said how so close they mirrored each other. So we have this idea of the temple worship, even in the setup of the church, and we'll get to that in a second. So if you look at that, you kind of see things, and you may even look and say, yeah, I can see where there are certain things here that make sense when I look even in this little church here in Wappinger Falls. The other thing that the church is based on is something called the basilica. So the basilica was from the Roman times, and that was the place of the judge. So the basilica had this rounded dome, half-rounded dome. We don't have one here, but many Orthodox churches in the altar, it's kind of like a half circle. And in it had the seat, and that's where the judge sat. And it was kind of like an open auditorium. So like when Christ went before Pilate, he was sitting in the mercy seat, and he would hear the supplications of the people and make the decision. So it was this public space. It wasn't quite like a courtroom, but it was more like a public place where supplications were brought. And so what you saw was this, as the church developed, particularly in the first centuries, they started to fuse those together. This idea of temple worship and this idea of the basilica. And it became sort of embedded with each other. And so when you go to many Orthodox churches, you'll see those two things. Now, very often, an Orthodox church will either be formed in a cross. There'll be set like the center dome, you'll have wings, like a cross. Or sometimes it actually looks like the bottom of a ship, a hole. Well, if you look, we kind of have that. Even though this is a Protestant church that was, a kit church that was put together in here, but you see this kind of idea, like the ship. Remember I talked last week about the ship? The church is the ark of salvation, and we're in the ark of salvation. Well, here we are. And the whole is a ship. All right? So, let's stand up, because this is all going to be there. We're going to go through, and we're going to walk through, and I'm going to show you different things. Are there any questions on this? Great. So, basically, the church is divided into three parts. We have the narthex, the nave, and the sanctuary, or the vestibule, the main part of the church, and the altar. Now, in the Old Testament, in the temple, you had three areas. You had the place of the penitent, you had the place of the faithful, and then you had the Holy of Holies. We have the same thing. So, the place, this vestibule, is actually a liturgical space. If you, like my parishioners in Las Vegas, many of my Ethiopian parishioners, they would take their shoes off. They would never walk in the church with their shoes on. They would take their shoes off and leave them there, and they would come in barefooted because it was a holy ground. They also, if they had their time of the month or whatever, they didn't come into the church. They would stay out in the vestibule because they felt it was so holy. I'm not saying do that, but that was their custom. In the early church, if you were, say you got in trouble, you did something wrong, and you got sort of a penance, and they said, well, you have to stand out in the vestibule for like 2 years. And you couldn't come into the church. And people would walk by and go, he did, he's still out here in the vestibule, he can't come into church. Now, we don't do that anymore. But nonetheless, it was an idea that coming into the sacred space was an important part of being a Christian. So, in many churches, the baptism actually is done in the vestibule. If it has a large enough vestibule, they have a baptism font in the vestibule. So if you haven't seen an Orthodox baptism, there's a point where you go 3 times around the font, and then the priest brings them into the church. Like we did the wedding last week, we do one on Sunday. The bride is met and the groom are met here. This is where the service begins, where the exchange of rings, and then the priest leads them into the church. Baptism begins here, and the priest leads them into the church. For a funeral, they meet the body here, and then lead the body into the church, and then escort the body out of the church. So there's this idea that this space is bringing us closer to this space, which is the focus of everything that we do. And so very often, vestibules could be incredibly decorated, as beautifully, if not more, than the actual church space itself, with iconography. So over the time, now, if you notice, you probably don't notice this, but it's kind of set up like an iconostas, like that, but it's set up here, because you have the Theotokos and Christ Theotokos, you have the name of the church, and you have John the Baptist, which is a very typical sort of way that we do that. We have other icons out here as well. But when we come into church, we're entering sacred space. All right. Now, if you come in here, you look around. Again, churches change, but you kind of look and you can see that you're entering from kind of the world into an image of heaven. Now, on the very back wall is called the high place. And very often there are different imagery that you can do. That is actually the icon of the prophecy of Ezekiel. When he sees the image of the man on a throne, and he's surrounded by angels, and he has shining with this bright light, and in that he has an image of a cow, an eagle, a man, and what's the other one? The ox, the eagle, the man, I don't know, I'll look when I get up there, I can't remember. And an angel, which the church realized that meant the four Gospels. So the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are often represented with those same symbols. And so when you look at that, you say, okay, this is what it is. Sometimes you'll have Christ enthroned. Sometimes you'll have the mystical communion. We have that at seminary, where Christ is giving out communion to the apostles. There are a lot of different types of imagery. And in the actual area, sometimes it's beautifully decorated with images from the Old Testament, with the liturgious saints, like John Chrysostom, Basil the Great, the services that we do. So anyway, so we look at that. So anyway, so this image here that we have, some of the icons I've been putting up, like this is the famous icon, the treasure. It's a reproduction of the actual treasure of the OCA, the famous Our Lady of Sitka, which is in our cathedral in Alaska. It was given by the Tsar, and it has many miracles associated with it, and actually survived fires and floods and all these things, and it's a beautiful shape. One day, every now and then it goes on tour, and one day we'll get it here, hopefully. And but that's one of our treasures. That's my imagery that I want us to remind us what we're supposed to be doing: catching fish, bringing people in. And there's other stuff in here. Many, like my church in Las Vegas, did not have bathrooms in the church, which is very traditional. You have another building for bathrooms, and because you don't want, it's kind of weird to go to the bathroom in the church. Some churches I know have bathrooms in the altar for the priest, but that's another story. Anyway, so understanding this idea that this is a liturgical space, this is an entry space, this is a way for us to go and start to go towards God. All right, so now we'll walk into the next spot. This icon, there's a lot of traditions. In the Greek church, they don't have icons on either side there. They'll have them in the vestibule, and the candles will be lit in the vestibule. Or sometimes they'll have an icon in the middle. This church kind of combines that. And this is the patron saint. So this will always be here. Normally, the patron saint could be on the center icon. But in this case, we have it back here, and we switch out the icon in the center. So, and what we've been blessed when the monks from St. Tikhon came, they brought us a relic of our patron, which is in there. So that's what that is. It's actually a bone of St. Gregory, Theology. And it's placed inside the icon. So this is kind of like the treasure of the church in a way. This is our name. Every church has a name. either after a saint or a feast day, and that's called their patron saint. And in many places, the day of your feast day is a huge celebration. And if you have a lot of churches in an area, everyone will shut their churches, say if it's the feast of St. Gregory the Theologian, and all the people will come to that church that has that name. And so actually getting a name of a church is a big deal. And normally what happens is the parishioners petition. Bishops have different ways to do it. Sometimes they'll just say, this is the name of this, or sometimes they'll petition saying, we'd like to have these names. And the bishop would select the name. Like, we have a lot of churches in the OCA, St. Peter and Paul, or St. Nicholas, and so some bishops saying, pick another name. Right? We have too many of them. So, but this was a connection with the chapel at St. Vladimir Seminary, which is called the Three Hierarchs Chapel, which is St. Gregory the Theologian, St. Basil the Great, and St. John Chrysostom. And Father Hopko, when they had the name, he was also teaching at St. Vladimir's, and so they chose one of the three hierarchs to kind of connect it with the seminary. And so that's kind of a neat thing that we do. Now there's a couple of things you'll note when you come in, because immediately there's things that you can notice that will tell you something. For example, we notice we're now in gold, right? Gold is the normal color of the church. It's like the color that we use most frequently when you get ordained. The first vestments you get are gold because you use that mostly. But there are other colors that we'll use. If you remember, we were in red for a short period because red is used either for the Nativity fast, anything to do with martyrs, and the cross. So we had the elevation of the cross, so we were in red. And then you have other colors so we'll go to red on November 15th, which is the beginning of the Nativity fast, and we'll stay in red until Christmas. Then you'll have colors like blue, which is for the Theotokos. You'll have green, which is the color of the Holy Spirit, so for Pentecost, and the period after that will be in green. Green is the sign of life, right? Green flower, green leaves, and all that sort of thing. You'll have purple for Lent. And purple is not because it's dark, it's because it's the most expensive. Purple is the royal color. If you've ever heard the term born to the purple, it means you're born into royalty, because you got to wear purple, because they can only make it out of a particular gland from a snail that was only found around Gibraltar. And it was very, very difficult to obtain. And even the stone porphyry, which was purple stone, is where the kings would stand on it. So purple is the royal color. Some tradition, this is a later tradition in the church, but we have black, which is for Holy Week, because that's the time of mourning. And then we have white for Pascha. You know, some traditions, other traditions do bright red. In Russian, they wear bright red because, you ever heard Red Square? Okay? That's not what it means. Krasnia is the term for bright. The same word for red is the same word for bright. So that's a tradition. But we use, in more non-Slavic, but definitely in the West, they use white. So these are, am I missing any colors? Red, blue, green, white, purple, black, gold. But the normal color is gold. So that should tell you something right away. We're in normal period of time. Just normal. And when we switch, when the colors switch, say, aha, now we're into a different period of time in the church. The candles usually match, but this is a very common thing where you have the red candles with the gold. I just got lazy because I don't want to change gold candles and change back to red candles. So I don't have staff. I have me. Anyway, so this kind of tells you something when you come in. So let's go more towards the middle. Closer, don't be shy. So this is called an analogy, which is a fancy word for a stand. Okay, we like to use fancy words for simple things, and it literally means for, an analogy, that which stands upon. And in some traditions, you'll have a center analogian, mostly Russian traditions. In other traditions, like Greek traditions, you won't have one. It's okay. We kind of combine all sorts of things. So the center analogian is going to tell you something as well. if we have an icon of the name of a saint or a feast day that's going on, it will go in this analogia. So when you come in and you see, like, for example, this Sunday is the Sunday for the Feast of the Protection of the Theotokos. It's a very particular feast about the veil being in Constantinople. We actually have an icon of the protection of the Theotokos, so she's in the middle. Okay, so she's there. But if you come and you see a different saint, which almost every week you're going to have a different saint there, because I pretty much have at least one per week that we can cover through the year. Or if you see a particular feast day, or it may be covered with flowers, or beautiful flowers that are made by parishioners, that means there's something special going on. All right. We have it on this side of the icon. There's a little icon and that I usually put out if a saint for the month, and we have the saint's relic, that will usually stay out for the entire month. We don't have one for September, last week's reading was that icon, so I'm just keeping it out until the end of the month, and then come October. And when I came here, I was the keeper of the relics for the church, so we have a whole room filled with all the different relics of different saints. So I asked the Metropolitan, can I take some to my new assignment? So he gave me a blessing. So we are blessed to have relics of a lot of saints around us. Some very hard to get ones, like Saint Seraphim of Serov, one of the great Russian mystics, Saint Alexander Nevsky, Saint Nicholas of Japan. We even have some that are newer saints that no one else has. So I always kind of feel it's like our protection. The saints are around us, and they protect us, and they're like magnets. That's how they attract people. They attract holiness when we have them, because these are the saints who are literally with us here in the church. Literally. When we pray to St. Herman, for the Feast of St. Herman, we have a piece of St. Herman here with us. It's a very pious thing to celebrate. From the very earliest times of the church, they celebrated in the catacombs on the tombs of those who had been martyred. You're going to learn more about that in a second. So anyway, so we see this, there's something to understand what's going on. Now, these two icons that we have here are basically reflections of the icons that we have up there on the iconostas. And it's really one of those things where people used to go up to the iconostas and kiss those icons, and the church said, well, let's bring them out so people don't knock over things or whatever. So these are there as a reflection of what those are there. Okay? And then in this church we have what's called the Golgotha. That's the place of the crucifixion. And you will see here during Holy Week, this will actually come out and be in the center. And we'll actually do a cross when we commemorate that. And if you look, that's the shroud, that's the burial shroud, Pataphios. That will be brought out and placed in the tomb of Christ. And on midnight, on Pascha, come out, and during the service, at a certain point, I actually lift the shroud out, and I bring it in, and I place it on the altar where it's because now we have an empty tomb. Right? We have an empty. And so you'll learn about all these beautiful things that we particularly during. And so this usually stays movable corpses that you can take. There's one in Monstrous and associated with it. It was a famous iconographer in San Francisco. And as he was transporting it to this highway from between San Francisco and the airport, it fell out. And he didn't came back. And in the middle, he found it unharmed, like it was transported there. And he has no explanation. Someone should have run over this, but somehow they didn't. Of the tombs in New my New Jersey City has a monstrous tomb. I mean, it's monstrous and it's beautiful. It takes like move it. In the Greek church, they like to do. Yeah.
It's a big thing that the women do.
Yes. So that's called the Golgotha, and we have a section there. I'm going to explain that. Now, you stand. They're candles. They're there to light candles. There is no do I light this candle that you want. People, you can light these candles and get some. This for the living or for the dead. This is the candles because people lighting over a period of time. Your candles as you want, and you'll see big handfuls of candles that are a way to pray. And the candles should be made out of beeswax. It should be, and it even tells beeswax if you can. And so we have these candles made by a mod. We get them shipped in. So anyway, the back, it could be there. The vestibule, all depends on how the baptisms. Like we have a big sort of Tupperware, which has only been used for fun, which we do adult baptism. And then there's a lot of you can do this. Some we have most of the feast days are around, and we have a whole different saints and they're in different. Like those are my there, all my great fighters, sticks, and we have our women's corner there. Saints. All of them are just around. Very often, Orthodox church will be frescoed with a theme that will feast saints that are special to the church to be done. And paint look like curtains, just like in the temple. Curtains on the side. This is what we have. We have some banners, processions, and you'll get to see those. This is the main part. In many Orthodox traditions, there are no chairs for the whole service. Just the side for people who need to. In America, we kind of gotten used to bought old Protestant Orthodox and the West where I came from, they're big on that. Mixture in the diocese about it. So we have and people wherever they want. In some churches, the men sit on this side. So, questions about this part of the church? Nope. And the cupola, you'll have sides. You'll have the four corners of the gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is a little bit of scenes from the Bible that are painted up. So there it is. Next, we come to this space. This is called actually like a Catholic church trailer. The space in many churches they still do. Got moved, icons on it, and become stuff. The solia is based to go back and forth, and then we have this. This is called the amulet. Now the amulet used to be in the center of the thing that was lifted underneath it. But the priest would go low and read the gospel. And over time, to this space, this bishop coming, you'll look square sort of middle of the church, starts the service. Still remains this idea is when the bishop's people, but amongst them, all his flock. So, and then people becomes a mess. So Leah, if you notice, here I get my from here. I bring. So it's a place of which. Next thing we have is means a wall of light. Many styles, many are way up. Some are a modern way of little way that didn't have as but they're important parts. All right, these doors, and you know. So if you go to Constantinople, the emperor can go through, only open at certain. That kind of distance came here. The services I open, and the only person who Dave, deacon, not like you're going to get hit by it, but it's respect because you're revealing the Holy of Holies. Remember, now the high priest allowed, and the priest can go, and it's connecting that place that became Christ took on humanity, and this, and through the Old Testament, read Mary, the door opened with Christ. The Old Testament. You have the royal doors. You'll have, in this case, we have the Annunciation. Gabriel visit. Wow. And you also these many years ago when it's kind of weird. I said, well, you pay. So you should have, we have these, Williamsburg, they have this doors, battles that you can just, with your fingertips, 1,000 years old or something. It's just amazing. So, and then we have here, but it's not the icon. It is, but This is the icon, right? This is the icon of Christ in judgment. Earthly time. First coming. Service when I bring out the church. So we live us in the community. Be with us now. Got it? Outdoors, you usually have, and then the church. Like for example, that the different weird things under the Serbs, under the Greeks, and then Jicha under. So I had on the iconostas, huge iconostas, because God forbid, Helen for the Greeks, the Americans into the economy. Either side of the deacon comes out into that. Or you'll have the first is deacon. St. Romanus, but normally you'll have deacons who'll be deacons. The idea of the deacon and heaven to earth come back out at a certain time out of those doors. It's just light all the candles, one candle, and all the brightly revealed. Everything is a possible period. It will remain open all that. Now, we have around the side, we have the apostle layer of Christ that we have over the icon. But in the center of the Eucharist, in actual course, that God's presence. That is called God's time. Intersect. By the way, what other chandeliers? And that's supposed to. Are there any questions on the come and stand up? Don't go through the. First off, for the altar, when we moved it, is really, if you notice, they don't go, is the center of the church, way in which you pass on the place for the altar. And when the altar gets, now, restore it, but we're wood, actually consecrate. It's supposed to be right now. With and things we wear. The cloth is placed on. There's a little, and the relic is in the early church. Yeah. I usually relics of the martyr they put multiple styles, different traditions, but this is a Russian style one, and you know it's fancy, it's beautiful. I had the other fancy one in there, and it's brought out at certain times. So we have the gospel, the law, the 10 Commandments. What else is in there? Anybody remember what else I talked about?
Candle.
The candles. The 7-branch candlestick. We had the rod of Aaron that budded forth life. That was always seen as a prefigurement of the cross where life came from. We had the angels, right? The images of the angels. These are liturgical fans with the image of the angels. When a deacon is ordained a deacon, when you're ordained, you're brought out into the center here, and the bishop takes each article of clothing that you wear, and he holds it before the people, and he says, Axios, which means worthy. And everyone goes, Axios, 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 worthy, worthy, worthy. If someone says anaxios or unworthy, the actual ordination stops, and it has happened. And the bishop has to go and investigate why someone thinks he's unworthy. So the last thing that they give the deacon is a fan. And he holds the fan. Because during the services, sometimes the deacons will actually have the fans over here. Now, like I was serving in Jerusalem. There are no screen windows, and the bugs are everywhere. And they kept the bugs off the chalice, and actually kind of gave you a little bit of a breeze. So these are actually, and you'll notice when we read the gospel now, they'll bring them out and hold them over the gospel. We can use them in processions. We can use them, there's a lot of different ways they can be used. These were just done, and they did a marvelous job. The same guy who painted those icons painted these, actually, and he matched it beautifully. I had someone, a retired engineer, actually came and measured it and carved this out with lasers and stuff so that it would match the cross. We have the two candlesticks here, which are supposed to represent the two natures of Christ. If you notice, I only light those for liturgy, when we do the divine liturgy. Otherwise, I just light these. What else is and these are hand crosses, right? So they're just crosses in which you bless people with. What else do we have in the temple? We had the showbread, right? So that's what this is. Sometimes they have big, fancy tabernacles, right? We have a very simple one. So once a year, I prepare the reserved sacrament on Holy Thursday, which is the commemoration of the first Eucharist. And then you take and you cut the particles into small pieces, and you take a drop of wine of the blood of Christ, and you put it on there. It's on a little tray, and it sits there until it dries out. So these are the ones that I did last year. So when I went, like today I went to see Maria Zedlovich, I come in and I take a little particle, and I have a kit, a special kit, and it's placed in there, and I bring communion to them. And I have a little chalice, and I put the wine in, and it softens it up, and then I give it out. So this is the reserved sacrament. There is never a time once the altar is consecrated when this is not, there's not consecrated reserved sacrament on the altar. So even when I'm making the new one, it's sitting here drying out in preparation, and I consume whatever's left over from last year at the end of that liturgy. They're still there. So this reserved sacrament is always here on the altar. If I run low, I can do it again. I can make an extra lamb and do it again. So that's the reserved sacrament. The showbread, the manna from heaven, it was there as well. Okay? Then underneath here, you probably saw this, is this cloth. This is the single most important thing we have in the church. If this church is on fire, I have to run in here and rescue this. We cannot exist without this. So you'll want to know what's in here. And at certain points, I open it up, and then I close it again. So let's go over here, and I'll show you what's in here. So this is called an antimencia, which means instead of altar. So wherever I serve, I cannot serve a liturgy without this. It stays with the church. If I have, like when I was doing stuff, I have extra ones that may be given to me by a bishop, like if I have to go to a liturgy at a scout reservation or somewhere else. But and when I was doing missions, I had one that I would carry. So what you have here, first, is the red cloth. Nice red cloth. And then you have this. Right? So this is a little sponge to help me keep it clean because I'm responsible. Anybody know what this looks like? Where in the church do you see this? Right there. Right? The winding cloth. So this is, in here it says, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, the antimencia, the holy table is consecrated. And this is consecrated with chrism and all this sort of stuff. And it's the Archbishop Michael of New York gives a new one. Some of them, I served on the original one that St. Herman had, and I found the one, and I served on the one that St. Innocent had when he was just a priest. We found it in the chancery. It was almost on the burn box. We used to have to, when they get old and tattered, we have to, but thank God we have some of these gifts. On 2018, month of December 27th, for the celebration of Divine Liturgy for St. Gregory the Theologian of Wappinger Falls. It's for this church, and it's signed by the bishop, Michael. And in it is placed a relic. So when, like for example, if they get old and tattered, we take the relic out, and there's a special way to dispose of them. Some bishops will issue new ones when they become the bishop. Some will just sign next to the old bishop. We have some antimencian churches that literally are consecrated by saints.
Is that considered the church?
This is the permission for the church to exist. If a church doesn't have this, they are not an Orthodox church. It has to have an antimencian by a canonical bishop saying you're allowed to celebrate the services. Some could be very colorful. So these are the standard. When I took care of these, I had stacks and stacks of these, and then when the bishop would come and say, oh, I need 4 new antimensi, I give them with the relics, and then he has a whole service that he does. Usually he'll do a bunch of them at the same time at a liturgy, and he'll consecrate them all. So this has all been chrismated, etc. So that's what it is. And the first thing I do when I go and visit churches and I inspect them, I see if the priest keeps their antimensi clean. Because if he doesn't, he's not doing his job. And so I'm immaculate with mine. So that's what this is. This is the permission for us to exist. And it sits underneath the gospel. And take a notice on Sunday liturgy. At a certain time, I will start opening the antimensium and closing the antimensium. You should always do it the same way. And there it is. So that's the antimensium. And we often say that this is all the gospel, which is the center of our life, is enthroned on the altar. This is the way my mom gave me many years ago. So I bring it out. I have a whole bunch of stuff people have given me over the years, and every now and then I'll pull it out from my stacks and stacks of stuff that I have and bring it to church. Like I had a gospel that was given to me by my priest growing up. I have a new cross, and I'll bring that every now and then. That's why I'm getting buried. Every priest gets buried with the gospel and the cross. So I have that gospel and the other cross I'll be buried with. I know my vessels I'm getting buried with, so I got it all worked out when the time comes. Anyway, so that we have that. This is just a stand to help me. This is the liturgy book, the same one, just as a priest one. Prayers, people I need to pray for, etc. So then we have the censer stand, right? What else was in there? The censer, right? Well, we have the censer stand. So we have different colors and different ways, and priests get to learn how to swing them and love to use them, and there's different types of incense that change out. And then over here we have the table of oblation. Now, in the early church, this was actually in a separate room. It was called, one of my favorite words, scoupophylakia. And the scoupophylakia was a room off of the church where people would bring their offerings. And the deacons would go through them, and they would find bread and wine, and that's where they would prepare the service. Well, over time, some churches still have it. Seminary has a scoupophylakia. It kind of disappeared, and they put it into the church. So this is where I prepare the communion. So when I come in the morning, underneath here, I'll show you, is all the chalices and we have different chalices and different spoons. And we're going to learn about that in another service. And all kind of other stuff that I need. Now you know where the key is in case you want to steal anything. It was sad, we had a chalice at St. Vladimir's at the seminary that was used by St. Innocent, and someone got in there and stole it, and we have no idea where it went. It's so sad. And so basically what it is where I prepare the gifts. So when I come in, we'll learn about this in liturgy, I come in way before anybody else is here. And I have a service that I do to prepare the bread and the wine and everything that will be used and offered. It's not just sort of put together. There's a whole service I do. Usually I'm just by myself. If you ever want to come, I'm usually here. I usually start at about 7:45, depending, 8 o'clock, and you're more than welcome to watch too. And sometimes priests will come and do it out in front of the people. I'm not too hot on that, but some priests will do that once a year so people can see what you do. And on here, we just have a candle, we have water, we have wine. That's a little censer. It's all part of what I use. Underneath here, remember, people give me old prayer lists and people to pray for. I have lists and lists and lists of names of people in here that I pray for at every time I do the Prosca meeting. And they all get a particle onto the pad. We're going to learn about that in the service, when we go through the services. And next thing is this. This is called, I'm sorry, you can't see me, the Synthronian, which means where you sit together. And remember I told you about the basilica? And that's where the judge sat? So we have a seat back here. Some of them are huge and very, very fancy. That's the bishop's seat. I can't sit in it. Only the bishop sits in it. So when you see him come here, that's where he'll stand. But there are seats for clergy to sit on either side of them. In the Russian tradition, the bishop sits here. In the Greek tradition, the bishop sits there on the side. Sometimes when you notice when Bishop Michael comes, he won't sit there, he'll sit on a chair on the side. And it's kind of interesting because the tradition was the emperor sat there and the patriarch sat there. But after kind of the fall of Constantinople and the bishops were made civil leaders, the bishops in the Greek tradition started sitting where the emperor was, where in the Russian tradition it was always, they stayed here. So there's different traditions about that. So this is actually the high place. And so you'll see at certain times I'll come up here and we'll always be sensing, and I'll actually face the high place. And it's like Prokimenons and other places, I'll be up here as part of the ritual of the service. So we have the high place, we have the altar area, table of oblation, all of that, which is found in the temple. Right? If you look at that picture, you'll see the Holy of Holies, the throne of God, all those sort of things. This has recreated that in the way that we understand it with the fulfillment of Christ. So the temple worship continues uninterrupted. See, there was one problem with the temple. Remember, there were two temples. The first one was destroyed. Right? The Babylonians came in, they destroyed the temple. The ark disappeared. We still to this day don't know where it is. We do know where it is. It's in the church in Ethiopia, but that's another story. And so the temple was destroyed, and then it was rebuilt. So Solomon's temple, it was rebuilt, but there was a problem. There was nothing in the Holy of Holies. It was empty because it had disappeared. But we also know that what happened? Mary came and was raised in the temple. She is the new temple where God dwells. And Christ came and fulfilled all of that. So the temple worship, which was an empty worship, was now fulfilled with Christ. And then what happened 90 years after, well, not 90 years, 30 years after Christ, 30 to 60 years? The second temple was destroyed because there was no need for it. So all that remains is the one wall. You know, the Wailing Wall, where you see in Jerusalem where people, they come and they pray, that's the last remaining part of the temple. And where the altar sat is now that mosque on the Temple Mount. And that's why there's such fights about it. Because that's what the Muslims say Muhammad ascended to heaven with the footbrake. It was built as an Orthodox church originally, by the way. So that's why that area is so, that's the place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. There's all sorts of traditions about that. So anyway, so what you're seeing here then is that fulfillment of the temple worship in which Christ gave to the church and which the church continues to this day. You see that connection? This is the Pascha machine. On Easter night, I'll bring that out. It has 3 candles. It's beautifully decorated. And there's all different traditions about that as well. You have different icons of these are Basil the Great, Gregory the Theologian. We have different saints in here as well. There's just other things. I don't know if there are any questions about that? About this? So if you want to come to look in this room, you can see in this room, you can come in. Can't go on the altar, but you can come to this room. And don't go freaked out by the casket up there. So this is just a sacristy room. Yeah. So the sacristy room is basically, we have the different icons I say we had. We use this on feast days for the Litia, the cross that was just out. These are all different books that I'll use, liturgical books that we'll use. Here's that gospel I was telling you about that was given to me. I'll be buried with, so you know. And then we have vestments. These are the church's vestments. I have my own set. I have about 14 or 15 sets of vestments. But these are the churches, different styles, Russian style, Greek style. There's all different vestments in here as well. There's the different color cloths when I change the cloths. They're all in here. So it's just a very practical thing in a sense. The altar candles, the candles that are used for liturgy, and in here are just different liturgical items I may need, like different types of incense, charcoal, all that sort of stuff. So we have all sorts of different things that are in here. That's all it is. So we'll go on to the other room. I'll meet you over there. I'll show you what's in here. We have 2 caskets. They're handmade. They're Orthodox style. So this is a tradition in the church. If someone wants to be buried in a traditional Orthodox casket, which has a full thing that's open, we have them available for people. It's kind of weird. But there are people who like to be buried out of that. Okay, so I'll meet you on the other side. Oh, and I have my other sensors here as well. I'm looking for a new table here, so if anybody knows something, let me know. So this is another sacristy room, and it's where the altar servers have their stuff. There's a sink. This is where they cut the bread, boil the hot water. There's all the different colored lamps in here, all sorts of different things like that. Candles, holy water that I do on Theophany. So if people want holy water to bring home, I have little bottles and people can bring them home. Other icons, and I don't know, George, you spend most of the time in here. The other casket's got to go up there when
The water.
the water to wash your hands. So, so you'll notice during the Lord's Prayer, the altar servers will come and I'll wash my hands, and that's a tradition. With the bishop, they wash it like 3 times. But for the priest, it's a tradition because you're about to touch the gifts, and you've been touching things and scratching yourself, and you want to have your hands clean when you touch the gifts that you just consecrated. So that's what they're doing. They're washing my hands. This is a new thing we just bought. Someone gave me money to buy a nice one from Russia, so it's a nice little thing.
This is for the wine. The pitchers.
Oh yeah, for the wine, it's all in here. The bottles of wine.
The one on the side table.
What's that?
Oh,
We're trying to get new for this and new for this, so it matches and all that. What's that?
That fell off the cloth.
It's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. So yeah, the air conditioning unit.
More icons.
Yeah, more icons. Yeah, there's lots of them.
If you close the door really hard, they fall off.
Yes. So actually, Vincent is working on making little lips on it, so we don't have that
I
anymore.
found that out
I
when I
had
was
little
cleaning
gum,
it.
I had little sticky things holding it, but now we have a nice paint job by Hank. We don't want to ruin it. So everyone, come on out.
So people volunteered to restore them by hand?
Yeah, yeah, like this. Eleanor was an icon. I have to give her this one. It fell and hit me on the head, actually.
Oh no.
So she just restored this one.
Ah, beautiful.
Yeah. So many of the icons in this church were actually done by parishioners, which is an unusual sort of thing. And so now you see how this idea of the temple and the basilica come together. And now you understand why we're set up the way we are, the theology of being approaching God, God being brought out to us, God coming down to us, and that the worship space actually has a logical sense. So when we start getting into the services and learning about the service, you'll understand why we do the movements that we do. For example, why I bring this gospel out, which is the little entrance, that was actually started outside. The gospel would be brought into the church for the services. Or the entrance with the gifts was actually from that room to be placed on the altar. So all of that has a certain logic to it. So, are any questions on this? What time is it?
It's about 8.
8:11.
Okay, we're going to finish up here. So how do you come into the church and how do you leave the church? Right? First off, we talked about how to do the sign of the cross. Right? So when you come into church, first thing you should do is you kiss. When you come into church and when you leave the church, you should always do the sign of the cross. So you first walk in, or if you're leaving, you stop and you turn around and do the sign of the cross. So you'll see some people will go like this, they'll touch the ground. It's just a sign of humility. Some will do 3 times, some will go down on their hands and knees, whatever. It's all different things. So normally, you'll see I'll come in, and then you kiss the bottom of the icon. Don't kiss St. Nicholas on the lips. And I've seen that, or the relic. Just kiss the bottom of the icon. I ask that people be careful with their lipstick because it really does destroy icons. I always come in before church and I clean all the icons in special ways.
I'm
Yeah.
not trying to be humorous, but I tend to wear really thick glitter lipstick. Is an air kiss okay? Or does it have to be?
No, you kiss it. Go ahead and
Okay,
kiss it.
all right, okay.
Yeah, it's okay. So you kiss that icon, you come into here, and you come to the center icon, same thing. Kiss that icon.
Sorry.
Then you go and kiss the icon of Christ. You stop, you can sign the cross, and you kiss the icon of Mary. If you want to kiss the other icons or any of them around here, then you go ahead and feel free to do that. People are attracted to certain icons, and so when they come, if there's a certain icon, they'll go and pray before it and kiss it. You're more than welcome to do all of those. When you leave, it's the same thing. You kiss the icon of Christ, the icon of Mary, center icon, and that icon. Stop, cross yourself, and you go out. Very simple. Can't mess up. All right? Yeah, you're coming in like that. When you leave, you're going to go same way. All right, in that order. You'll see at certain times in the church services, like for the elevation of the cross, we do what's called a prostration, which is basically crossing yourself, getting on your hands and knees, put your fists down, and you touch your head to the ground. It's a sign of humility. Muslims took it from us. And during Lent, there are times we do certain prayers called the St. Ephrem prayer. We'll do that a lot. And for first week of Lent at seminary, I think we kept a count. We were well over 1,000 of those. Yeah. But you'll see that happen a lot, so don't get freaked out when you see people doing it. It's a sign of reverence. And sometimes we need to get on our knees, right, before God. And so you'll learn a lot about this during Lent. Okay, just telling you. When I come in to church, before the liturgy, I actually have a set of prayers I have to read. They're called my entrance prayers. You'll find them in the liturgy book. And I do them right here up front. And there's a whole series of prayers I do before I come to the altar. So the deacon, I told him just to come whenever he can. He doesn't have to come and do the prayers with me, because usually they do for the priest. I told him whenever you get here, because they have to drive. You'll see that he'll come up and he'll do those same prayers before he goes into the altar. So that's what he's doing when he walks in. And when the bishop comes in, he has a whole thing. So when the bishop comes in and we do the full hierarchical, we'll start here. It'll actually be vested here. There's a whole series of prayers, and he'll stand there and he'll vest. George has done this many times, and he's even been dressed up as a bishop. We were teaching the Sunday school class, so I got all the bishop vests so they could see which each one believes. But we'll get into that class later. So, yeah. Other questions?
I may have missed it, but when you stopped at the entrance from the vestibule, did you also cross there and then cross again at the icon?
Yeah, you can.
I thought you can. Okay.
Yeah, I usually just do it. I'm walking in, I'm crossing myself, and going right to the icon. Yeah, so that's fine. Good? 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 Wonderful. You had this. All right. So we'll finish there. There will not be any class next week. The first Thursday of every month, I cannot do classes because I have to be at the fire department and do work with them for chaplain work. And they have their meetings the first Thursday of every month. So I'm sorry. But after that, we will get to the next class, which I will see. Maybe I'll have a seminarian teach. One seminary is supposed to teach on Trinity, another one on iconography. I'll see if he's ready. He's been working on his class on the Trinity. If not, we'll start working on some of the theology of Christ, and we'll start moving forward on that. And once we get that solid base, Creed, Christ, the Trinity, then we'll start into the services. We'll start with the liturgy. We'll talk in depth, probably 2 classes about the liturgy. All right? So let's do a closing prayer. Are there any questions?
I do not see any. Nope.
Okay. Is Mom watching?
No.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. It is true you need to bless you, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure and mother of our God, more honorable in the cherubim, more glorious beyond comparison of the seraphim. Without corruption, you be heard to God, the Lord, true Theotokos, we magnify you. Through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, of Jesus Christ, our God, mercy on us and save us. Amen. I just realized, does everyone know what that term Theotokos means?
That's Mary, yes?
Yes, Mary, it's Mother of God, literally, Theo Genetos, she who gave birth to God. Very important term. We'll have a class on Mary. It was one of the ecumenical councils dealt with it because ultimately how we understand Mary is how we understand Christ. Mary always points to Christ. Right? One of the icons. So that's what that term Theotokos or Bogoretsu in Russian. In America, we decided to just keep Theotokos. It's such an important theological term that we may translate all the other words into English, but Theotokos we kept because it is very precise. All right, that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Can double check.
I think that's all. I do have a question.
His mom wasn't on there last night.
No, that's
Making her dizzy by moving
Oh,
all
my.
over the place.
Yeah, Adam said Marcello used to go and hide his face, stuff his face with bread in that room.